been very successful without anybody stopping them from putting this in place. Is it going to be successful in keeping down the global insurrection against banker occupation, as I call it? I think that this is the war, and now it's on. We've been talking about it coming for a number of years, and clearly it's here. And it's here, obviously, in North Africa and the Middle East. It's in Europe. It's in Athens. It's in Dublin. And now it's in London in a way that has caught everyone by surprise, really, because it's spread very, very quickly, and it's very violent, and it seems completely anarchistic. And yet, if you look at this at a more of a broader historical and global perspective, you can see that this is part and parcel of this tension that exists between the bankers who are stealing wealth on a minute-by-minute basis and getting better and better at it, and nobody's stopping them, and the rest of the world population, which is being disenfranchised, bankrupted, and thrown under the bus. And this is causing this conflict and erupting in different countries in different ways.
Max, if you had to choose one geographic area in the world where more of the banksters, the oligarchs, the Ponzi scheme operators are based, wouldn't it be the city of London, within London? And after you give us the answer, describe for folks what the city of London within the city is.
Right, absolutely. The City of London has been the global center for the global hedge fund community because they're very lax in their regulatory environment for banks and hedge funds. And as a result, they attract the hedge funds. They also attract many of these oligarchs that are fleeing their countries. For example, the Icelandic bankers who stole billions, they took up residency in London. And they give them safe harbor. As a result, in a perverse way, the real estate in London is out of reach for the average person because of the price appreciation due to the inclusion now in the arrival of all these oligarchs from Iceland or from Russia, different territories around the world where they have been able to totally co-opt the system, confiscate wealth. But London is definitely the center of the global arbitrage and the global money laundering business as well. And as a result, it attracts all sorts of these kleptocrats and oligarchs. And the City of London, which is their quote-unquote Wall Street, it's a principality within London, and it fits amongst these other there's a couple of other territories in the world. I believe Washington, D.C. is one of them, and so is the Vatican. These are three centers of it's its own sovereign, if you will, and they have their own government, and they kind of communicate with each other. It's part of the ability of the elite to communicate with each other completely outside of any sovereign that is reportable to the public. It's a private sovereignty. And obviously with the Queen and the monarchy also nearby, there's a lot of communication there as well. There's a lot of wealth that's being controlled. Remember, Gordon Brown last year talked about the shadow banking system. And this is a $14 trillion banking facility that's completely outside of the normal channels of the banking system, has completely unregulated, it's completely non-visible, non-transparent. And this is where many of the stock deals go down and where a lot of the inside information is capitalized on before becoming public, because it's done completely out of view of the public. And this shadow banking system is tied into the global derivatives business, the credit default swaps, for example, that are destroying Greece, the credit default swaps that destroyed Ireland, the credit default swaps that are now destroying America. You know, when the S&P rating agency downgraded the U.S. from AAA to AA+, suddenly there's huge volatility and there's huge trading activity from the vultures who are now swooping in with credit default swaps and effectively attacking America with the financial weapons. And this is part of the collapse of the U.S. These guys have no sovereignty of their own. They're simply marauding rogue financial bankers or financial terrorists, and they go wherever they can make the most money. And
that was my next question, and it's these very groups, these six big mega banks that are always pushing a global corporate government that we pay our VAT taxes to. They're not content now to just buy off our politicians in Europe, England, and the United States. Now they want open world government, but at the same time, the laws of nature, the laws of history show that they can't really be above the law forever, especially if they totally decimate their host nations. I mean, even here in the U.S., some municipalities are having to lay off 60, 70% of their police. At a certain point, they're destroying any markets for them to even operate in. I mean, I understand they're a parasitic system feeding on the real market in the real world, but it seems that they think they can just go on forever. Max, do you believe that they've bitten off more than they can chew?
Well, let's take a look at what's going on in Europe, for example. A couple of weeks ago, and for the last couple of years, there's been this ongoing crisis in Europe. Now, what happened last week is that the European Central Bank, principally coming out of Berlin, they're putting together this new European-wide credit facility, a multi-trillion-dollar facility, which allows them to repackage all the bad debt in Greece and Ireland, roll it up to this European-wide credit facility, and deal with it over a period of time, kicking the can down the road. The downside is that countries like Greece and Ireland lose their sovereignty. Now, if you look at the global scale, what I've been talking about on your show for a couple of years, and other guests on your show have made the same comment, is that globally, this type of approach to solving the toxic debt problem will be applied, and we'll see the emergence of a global central bank. In Davos last year, it was remarked that they need a $100 trillion credit facility. Why would they need that? Because they're going to take all the debts of America and Europe and South America and repackage them in a new global credit facility, probably the new global currency, a variation on the Bancor or the SDR, and repackage and resecuritize, roll that all up to the new global banking central bank system. And they'll do this in the name of preserving liquidity and preserving markets and keeping people's purchasing power intact. But the end result will be all the nations participating will have lost their sovereignty. They'll be answering to a global institution. And, of course, that is not something that people who are born into America sign up for, to lose their sovereignty.
Well, that was my next point, is this is a perfect plan for global financial domination. The countries are signed on to the too big to fail, and then the nations lose their sovereignty because they've bailed out the banks, but then the mega banks are the bosses over you and order you to cut all of your basic services so that more money can be paid into them when they've created the fraudulent system. So briefly here, how do we reverse this? What are ideas or programs, Max, that you think would be a good way to extricate ourselves out of the finance oligarchs' global system? I mean, one thing would obviously be to get rid of the Federal Reserve here domestically, and in other countries, get rid of the same model and go back to currency being issued as a national credit with the faith of the country behind it, not the Federal Reserve System we got in 1913. What, raise interest rates, write off the 1.5 quadrillion in fiat debt garbage we've been signed on to? I mean, are those good ideas? How about we start arresting these banking heads that admittedly sold trillions of dollars of fake instruments? I mean, it is truly us or them. As you said today on the radio, they are imploding our entire world into their own control, and we are going to see more riots, looting, things that actually just hurt the general public unless we reverse this system.
Well, my favorite idea is to arrest the bankers. And you have a great example of that with the 1980s, with Bill Black, the regulator at the time, who arrested and prosecuted more than 1,000 bankers, went to jail as a result of the savings and loan crisis. Now, everything is in place for a repeat of that event and to put these top bankers in jail for committing massive acts of financial fraud. And I think this would clean up the system. It would send a message to the public that looting is no longer tolerated, and it would be a great step forward. I mean, that's an obvious step. Now, why doesn't the Attorney General make that step? Why doesn't Barack Obama encourage that step? Because they're totally co-opted by the system. So the entire institutional approach, whether it's try to go after them on a legal basis or try to reinstitute sound money or try to support a candidate who supports sound money, like a Ron Paul, for example, I mean, those are great institutional approaches. None of them seem to be working because the institutions themselves are now completely broken and not working. So that leaves only two choices: civil disobedience or a violent reaction. Clearly, you would want a civil disobedience reaction. That's your first choice. And if you're trying to attack the banking system and you want to hit them where it hurts, I can think of a few ways. Number one, there could be a mass participation in a mass default on mortgages. This would destroy the banks and send a message. There could be a mass default on credit cards. There could be, in the UK, as we mentioned before, a boycott of the license fee to the BBC. The BBC has got to be held responsible for not reporting on the crime for the past 10 years. So those are the types of civil disobedience acts. And of course, on your show, going back to November of last year, we suggested people buy silver. It was 26. It's now over 40. And, that has the double action of preserving your wealth as well as exposing banks on Wall Street to the liabilities of their short sale on silver. I saw a headline today on Joint Report that talked about the fact that traders who were short gold, they sold short gold, they sold gold that they don't own, they are getting decimated. They are getting hammered. They're suffering huge losses. That has to happen if the system will return to any kind of integrity.
It is that fundamental rebellion of people going back to what's valuable: gold, silver, food, land, information, and more just simply pulling out of the fiat system. That will then expose these financial vampires and will show that they've been engaging in naked shorts. Two final questions for Max Keiser at maxkeiser.com. And it's a perfect segue. I want to talk about gold. It's now gone up to 1,800 today on the announcement that Western governments are going to accelerate the devaluation of their currencies. We saw other major commodities go up as well. J.P. Morgan 2 days ago had said they thought 1,800 by the end of the year. Now they're saying 2,500 or higher. So give us your view on that. And then let's briefly talk about Bank of America. Are they the next Lehman Brothers? Are they the next sacrificial lamb to terrorize the public into more banker bailouts?
Well, as you know, gold and silver, it's a function of the relative price of the U.S. dollar. And the dollar is very weak. It's hitting new lows against Swiss franc and other currencies around the world. And obviously, if Ben Bernanke is saying that he's going to keep interest rates at 0% for an indefinite period of time, that means that there's no incentive to buy dollars at all.
And Greenspan, don't forget, on Meet the Press Sunday, Meet the Horse, said that, hey, we're not going to default. We're just going to print more money. That was a hyperinflationary Weimar Republic statement. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, that's exactly right. And China immediately came out and said, we find your views irresponsible, and they're our largest creditor, the U.S., and they've been actively buying gold. So the dollar and the U.S. policy, really, if you think about it, the only possible way you can grow the U.S. economy, if you look at the various levers out there and what you could push, what you could pull to try to create some wealth, there's only one viable path, and that would be to debase the dollar, to try to make exports more viable in the global economy, in particular America's agricultural exports. America still does do a lot of agricultural export. If they can crash the dollar, they will get more agriculture exported out of the U.S.
But it'll take years to get an industrial base back, even if our currency was comparable to the Chinese currency or the something like the peso. I mean, this is asinine.
Well, as I've said on your show before, I made the prediction that before long, the biggest industry in America will be cotton picking.
Yeah.
And everyone should familiarize themselves with some of those old spirituals like jump down, pick a bale of cotton. But now moving on to Bank of America. Bank of America, of course, bought into a couple of the failed lending institutions during the last crisis. And as a result, they absorb billions, hundreds of billions of bad debts and trillions in derivatives. And because there hasn't been any growth in the 2 or 3 years, predictably, there hasn't been any ability to write any of that stuff off or pay any of it down. So now Bank of America is going to go down. And this is a huge bank, and it would send shockwaves through the global economy once again, set off another banking crisis, set off another bailout scenario, and further debase the dollar. But Bank of America looks like it's getting close. And Citigroup also looks problematic. Their balance sheets are loaded with debt, and they have off their balance sheet, Alex, trillions of dollars worth of debts and derivatives. that they've had for years, but they've always been able to service those debts.